Well guys, we are back for another episode of the Liberal Asshole Show, episode 70, and here are today's topics.
Russo-Ukraine war 1 year later, massive train wreck in Ohio, GOP wants to ban Trump from debates, Cop City, SCOTUS trying to destroy the internet, JK Rowling is a terf, we don't need to be thing of that, we already know, but we're going to reinforce it, and Fox News wants weed to stay illegal.
Oh boy, all the Karens we're going to be dealing with later. So, what do you want to talk about first?
Let's start with the Russo-Ukraine war.
Alright, so, it's hard to believe, but today marks officially 1 year since the Russo-Ukraine war started. And I figured, because it's probably going to be a long time because we got a lot of things to discuss, but I thought a cool idea to start off would be watching our episode when we covered it the day after it started. This is the first time I think we've watched a previous episode of ours at the same time it aired. So, we're going to watch just a little bit of it to see what we talked about and see if anything changed. So here we go. Well guys, we are back for another episode of the Liberal Asshole Show. Get to the actual war.
Florida passing don't say gay.
Alright, so of course, unfortunately, we got to talk about this first off. So, yesterday night, Russia invaded. Yep, of course, how much the border has changed in the control in the years since. Which we're going to get to the border a little bit later on because we haven't talked about it in months because there hasn't been really changed since like middle of November. Ukraine. Something that we were hoping wouldn't happen, unfortunately did. And from what I've seen let me get the map too for you to look at if you haven't seen. This is as of recently of the current progress. Like Ukraine pretty much kicked Russia out in the north from the previous, 1 day in, but unfortunately Russia pretty much gained all the south since then.
Made as much ground as I thought they would.
Yeah, and remember now that parts of Mariupol are now under Sharia because of the Islamic Nazis of Chechnya.
And I'm sure Hinkleboy would approve of them.
Ukraine is putting up a massive he's lusty. He's not openly saying it now, but he was lusting for nuclear war at one point.
Plus, he's too busy getting horny over taking pictures of himself on Twitter all the time. Remember? I even made fun of him earlier for it. Wikipedia mentions this. I don't know if it's true because it is coming from Ukraine. They might be just saying it to like get morale up, but supposedly, according to them, they've killed almost 3,000 Russian troops.
Oh, jeez, if that's true.
And of course, like we keep saying, don't ever believe Russia and Ukraine when it comes to the war counts. But according to Ukraine's military, Russia has now almost 150,000 casualties. Now remember,
if this would be a pirate, then this would be at best a Pyrrhic victory, and at worst a humiliation for both Russia and Belarus.
Well, Belarus says they're not fighting in the war. We don't know if we and still to this day really not yet. But if this is true, that's almost 3% of the entire invasion force of Russia dead in not even 2 days. So and of course now they have I think Russia has somewhere between 300 to 500,000 in the front. But unfortunately, which is like I think 3 times more than they originally started with, which is the capital. Yeah. So
wow.
Not looking really good in that regard. Now, but hey, that's good now because now they're not near the capital. Of course, I want to bring this up before we talk about because Harry's done this, and I've seen a lot of other people do this too when we talk about this and Russian imperialism. America. So yeah, good old American diabolism.
Because remember, according to them, it's only imperialism when Western terrorist organizations does it. And that Russia and China and that because of the history of imperialism of the West, Russia and China must be allowed to do whatever the fuck they want, and they love genocide of. And remember, Ukraine is protecting Moldova, who doesn't have a full-time standing army, and Georgia, who's already had part of their territory stolen, and Russia would really love to steal the rest of the country, and indirectly, they're also helping to defend Taiwan because China's like
look at what Russia's doing.
Not quite sure about this.
Well, we're going to get to Moldova in a little. We're going to get to Moldova in a little bit, but unfortunately, too, remember Georgia's completely separated from Ukraine. So if Russia
doesn't matter, there was a second set of arrows that shot out from Moldova that showed, and then intelligence guys and all that were able to use the thing, and they pointed. They were going to go Ukraine, Moldova, turn around and strike Georgia. I think even at one point they were going to go Moldova, Ukraine, and then just keep charging through, go down into the Caucasus and take out Georgia.
But it's also true that they're not connected to Ukraine. So I mean, if Russia's really stupid, they could try and attack Georgia anytime they want, but that would be probably very suicidal.
Syria, Iran, but that would be absolute suicide.
America is bad, and we doing about this. So shut the fuck.
You
Talk about this and not talk about Japan. American diabolism have already condemned Russia. They have done massive sanctions on them, although they didn't do SWIFT yet. And I just found out just now before we started that they actually are now sanctioning Putin himself, which is pretty dumb because that is not going to affect him whatsoever. Like, literally, that would be like trying to sanction Kim Jong-un. That's not going to affect him whatsoever, so it's kind of pointless. So, of course, now... They've done so many sanctions recently, like the last year since I did this video, that I don't even know them all what they've done. Now, here's something
Australia did another round literally yesterday.
There's like two technically there's actually like three rationale for this invasion. One is how long was this for? Kind of like what they did in Crimea, is that, there are Russians there, so we're trying to protect Russians in Ukraine. Well, here's the thing. They've been killing hundreds and hundreds of Russians ever since in Ukraine. So they're doing the exact opposite of what they claim to do in that regard. 2 days before the invasion. The rest of it is pretty much Ukraine. So if you really are just trying to protect Russians, why are you invading all the rest of Ukraine?
Yeah.
And then, of course...
Look at the missile attacks near the Russian border with Poland. Near the Ukrainian border with Poland.
Yeah.
You're not going to be doing that unless you're intending to try and take all of it.
And another thing, too, that Harry also kept insisting that this is all to, like, stop Ukraine from joining NATO. Well, it is true.
Considering that due to Crimea that they couldn't.
And Donbass, too, remember?
Yep, and Donbass.
So, yeah, that's always a funny thing. If the main thing was Ukraine joining NATO, they couldn't. They literally can't because of the current border conflict with Russia. So, and of course, this war not only has encouraged Ukraine, because before Russia took even Crimea back in 2014, Ukraine overwhelmingly did not want anything to do with NATO. But once Crimea and Donbass happened, now they wanted to. Now the point that they actually applied to join NATO when Russia annexed all those areas, and now Sweden and Finland are trying to join. Those are historically neutral countries. So if this war was really just about NATO expansion, well, guess what? The war did the exact opposite of what they wanted. So stupidity again.
What it needed to do was take Crimea, and that's it. Ukraine's never going to be in NATO.
But that's not surprising coming from Russia.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure we're going to get to in a little bit what the actual reason is. NATO doesn't actually want Ukraine in NATO. Ukraine wanted to join all the way back in like 2008, but they kept refusing. And of course, they don't meet the criteria to join it. It would take decades. And so, as you said and I said before, it's likely, according to NATO, that they can't because one of the reasons to require join is that they can't have border disputes. Well, they have border dispute with Russia over Crimea and the Donbass area. So and now, of course, those annexed territories, that's a third border dispute now. There's like no way Ukraine can join NATO right now. And even Zelensky, Ukraine's president, admitted just before the invasion that it stalled pretty much. And it might even just be a pipe dream that we might never join NATO. So if Russia really doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO, it pretty much is mission accomplished right now. So why are you still invading then if that's the case? Because that isn't... It was also mission accomplished pretty much even before the attack. Because like I said, overwhelming majority of Ukraine did not want anything to do with NATO until 2014. That's all of a sudden when it flipped. Also the case, there's more to it. Putin wants to reunite, make Russia great again. Like bring back the territorial control of the Soviet Union. And Ukraine is in the way. So they're invading them to either annex them or make them into a puppet. And we all know that's the real reason.
That's exactly
Putin
why.
wants control of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. And annex, puppets, either way, he wants it. And that's the real reason why this war happened.
I heard that once Russia's done with Ukraine, they're going to swing up into Belarus, and then swing
and that's the real reason why he didn't want them to be in NATO, because it would make it even harder for them to invade, because then they would get destroyed by NATO. That's why they haven't really done anything to Poland or the Baltic states.
Baltic states.
Or Romania, which we know they probably want to try and do with to be careful with Moldova.
Thing. Here's the thing,
That says
The Baltic
Moldova's so
states are part of
small
NATO. So if
that
he does attack NATO,
you'll have to be a
Article
little
5
careful
and World War
with
III, all of
not
NATO will
going into
respond.
Romania.
Yeah, and anyway, because I can tell you now, as pretty close to as soon as NATO responds, if Russia goes into the Baltic states, China's going to go, Tibet looks really nice. So does Hong Kong. And you know what, Taiwan? It's about time we properly reclaimed you. And probably going to start doing them as well.
And the funny
they've already been threatening Taiwan. They've been clashing with India in regards to Tibet and a couple other little areas.
Yeah, that was back in 2020.
And they've been cracking down and sabotaging.
Man, it's amazing how long we taled about this. We talked just like 20 minutes into the episode.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that big of a deal.
Taiwan,
Yeah.
Yeah, that it was.
Officially run them over.
The biggest
so
war in Europe
we have
since
to make
World
this
War
abundantly
II.
clear.
That's a
Biden-
war you
Yeah.
don't want to see
Speech, which
happen
I've always been good,
again.
did say it. If they lay a finger on any of the Baltic states, or Poland, or Romania, or Hungary, and Slovakia, because they also border Ukraine if Russia actually made all the way to the end of the Ukrainian
I think
area.
it'll be most likely either for Putin. It would be most likely either the Baltic states or Moldova.
Well, Moldova's not part.
You've got to get through Moldova to get to.
Which we're actually going to have to get to Moldova in a little bit after we watch a little
Moldova's
bit
not
more of
part
this
NATO,
video.
but Romania is. But we have to make it abundantly clear. If you do attack anyone that's NATO, then it's on. We can't.
Yeah.
And we have to. And also about China too. If you didn't notice, China has been like trying to both sides everyone when they're up.
And still to this day, China is still kind of like trying to both sides it and trying to like stay
Yeah.
out of it. And from what I've heard, since especially with the sanctions done on Russia, that China actually might be straight up scared of Western sanctions being applied on them if they did anything to Taiwan.
Yeah.
So we kind of effectively somewhat scared China into doing somewhat what we want. And to the point where they've kind of talked Russia out of considering ever doing nuclear weapons, and hopefully that keeps working. So yeah, if we are scaring China, good! Let's keep
Yeah,
scaring
not
them.
only that, they may actually
And keep them from
all
fucking with
depends on
Taiwan,
that,
too.
might actually get China to back off around Taiwan.
Yeah, you fucking better back off.
Like talking about the invasion of Ukraine. On the one hand,
They probably don't. China probably does. China's got enough fucking problems internally at the moment. You think
And they've gotten worse since, too, remember.
to be like
Yep.
that
Way
they use
worse.
their imperialism's soft power more than hard power, using their Belt and Road Initiative to bring people into countries into their sphere of influence.
yeah, because
And so they probably don't want full scale war. But if they're dragged into it, well, they're gonna fucking take the local areas they can.
because China, on the one hand, agreed with Russia in terms of like America's agitating this and that they're right about like NATO expansion, but on the other,
Now here I'm going to be a little bit more honest, which is going to trigger a lot of people like Vosh. I think the West still has somewhat responsibility for this too. Not everything like Harry and other idiots said, but it's not entirely only Russia's fault for this. We gotta be honest
there's been a
in that
couple
regard.
bits that they have.
on the other hand,
I
before the
will
invasion, they also
fix
said,
that
funny
have-
enough, that all countries must have their territory secured, basically, and that includes
Respected.
Ukraine.
Unless it's
When they
Taiwan,
point
of course.
to Russia, they also point out
Yeah,
China if we point out
of
Taiwan
course.
as well.
Hypocrisy, it's fine as
So
China.
to be fair, Taiwan is still technically part of China. It's almost like an autonomous region. I think the term is for it.
They're right.
Where it's still technically part of China because it's got to compete in the Olympics as Chinese Taipei. It doesn't have a seat on the UN, I think it is.
They're doing,
Or they do, but only as part of China.
they're doing it
And
to,
so I prefer that be resolved like peacefully, or keep the situation that it is
See,
right
how
now, where it's
long is
basically an
this?
autonomous region.
10 minutes.
they are
in.
independent, but they're doing that to like appease China to not piss them off, because if they do have independence, they will declare war on them, as they said. So it's like a limbo. They are independent, but they're like diplomatically pretending to not be in order to appease China. So
Yeah.
anyway, so what do you have to say about this invasion?
I mean, the Ukraine's putting up a hell of a fight, which is good.
Oh boy, did they put up one hell of a fight in the
They
year
have.
since.
I said that they're gonna win though.
No.
Oh.
As Harry,
you can only
Hinkle, and other idiots are mauling very hard.
I reckon-
All they are, because they want
But honestly, this one is
genocide,
probably
because
going to be a
they
direct victory
think the
for
Ukraine's a
They're not
Nazi
even
terrorist
gonna be
state
able
and
to
that
swing out to
all
Belarus.
Ukrainians
Well,
are
that
Nazis,
they
and that's why they must be
And-
genocided.
That reminds me.
Which is funny, because they support the actual Nazis in the Russian
Yeah.
Reich. As I made a beautiful flag recently, too, for them.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, I remember the yeah, like I said, remember not just Wagner, who are openly neo-Nazi, but also the Chechen Islamists and jihadists, who are basically Nazis but with an Islamic stripe instead of Christian.
And not only that, the Russian state is Nazi. Oof. How about
Yes.
that, Hinkle boy?
You fascist grifter.
Oh boy, what an idiot. So I think we've covered pretty much the basis of this video. So we'll stop watching that, but then we're going to get to the map, since, as you can see, actually showed the map was when the Kherson retake happened back in the middle of November, so it's been over 3 months, and there really has not been that much changes. There's the offensive near Bakhmut, which I think is in the Donetsk area, so near Donbass, and Russia lately, like the last 10 days, has actually gained territory, but it's very, very, very small. It's so small that I could probably, my 1.2 mile walk, I could probably do that a couple times. I'd probably take more territory over in a few hours than they've done in a few months. It's basically being a grinding slow gain. I think I remember reading, at this rate, if they kept this up, it would probably take a few decades for them to actually take over Ukraine. The gain, it's really not even worth it how much they're losing. Because the death toll on Kyiv independence, if you believe the numbers like we talked about earlier, you shouldn't, but if you went off them, the casualties Russia is dealing with is double what it used to be. There have been a couple days where it's straight been in 1,000 casualties a day.
Nice.
It's so bad that I had to see a picture of this, and it wasn't a really nice sight to see, but they're just dropping Russian soldiers' bodies out in the snow in mass open graves and all that stuff, because that's how bad it is, because they have no way to deal with it. Yep. So yeah, there hasn't been much change though in the territory sense, plus it's winter, so offenses never really work in the winter, as you all know historically. They have to wait till it's more like milder temperatures and all that. So now, and of course, the last few months, we've been wondering, there's been reports about maybe there might be a new Russian offensive. They might even be stupid enough to actually try a massive offensive like they did last year, like go through Kiev and all of them once again. Now, of course, if they do that, I don't think they're going to be successful. Ukraine beat them when they were completely outnumbered and wasn't expecting it. Now they are expecting it and fully prepared. So if you do try that, it's going to be even more painful than before. So I don't know if that would even work. And of course, talks about maybe Putin might be trying to get Belarus in, which no idea if that would even work, because Belarus is so weak.
Could backfire, and remember that could backfire and lead to
Lukashenko being overthrown.
Belarusian things turning on Lukashenko.
Yeah, because I just found out, because I watched a video about this recently, the overwhelming majority of Belarus actually does not support the war. So if Lukashenko is forced to join, that could probably straight up overthrow him. But but the thing is, even if they did join, I don't think it would make that much difference, because Belarus is just way too weak. Hell, 1v1, I think Ukraine would probably outright invade, conquer all of Belarus, because they're that weak. And of course, speaking of Belarus, there was a report recently that Russia is trying to get, take over all of Belarus by 2030, like straight up annex them with the with the I can't remember what it's called, but there was a Union State-like treaty they had signed back in 1999 with the goal of Russia and Belarus reuniting into one country. So it looks like Putin is trying to do that, because what Ukraine's experiencing is what Belarus, in the best cases, like a puppet, to probably be eventually annexed. Because if Russia got what they want, that's what Ukraine probably would be, puppeted and eventually annexed and stuff like that.
Yep, and with Moldova and Georgia.
All right.
And then later on, China does the same thing to Taiwan.
And speaking of Moldova, that was a recent flare-up lately that there's concerns that Russia might be trying to do something in Moldova. Recently, they actually tried to do a coup, if you didn't hear about that last week.
Oh, jeez.
And thankfully, it spectacularly failed. And there were reports, multiple things saying that they either might fly an invasion force to try and take over their main airport in Moldova. I don't know how you're going to do that, because you can't reach from the sea. You had to do a massive invasion for Ukraine to reach, and I don't think that's going to happen.
And even if you got the air one, how wide's Moldova? Because you're going to come very close to getting in. Is it like Moldova's airport either really close to Ukraine or really close to Romania? By the way, Romania is in NATO.
Well, that's what I was trying to get to, too. There was another report that maybe they would fly in over Ukraine, but good luck, you're going to get shot down. And if you fly over Romania, you're going to probably get shot down, too. And that could be, unfortunately, an incident that could lead to, well, I would say maybe World War III. But hey, Russia did this to Turkey and Syria back in 2015 when they flew into Turkish territory. They shot down, nothing happened. But yeah, that would be a dumb idea to try an actual invasion of Moldova because it's not going to work. And there was another report that maybe they're trying to invade from Transnistria. I know we know Moldova's weak, but Transnistria alone, Moldova should be strong enough to, at the bare minimum, at least keep them back. I think they might be able to take it over completely. Last I checked, it was like only 1,500 Russian troops there. Moldova, at last I checked, has at least 6,000. 6,000 is going to surely beat 1,500.
And remember, in both cases, neither of them are full time. But I want to make a correction. I think Moldova's what army they do have has become full time due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And then
I also think something similar is going on with Georgia as well, because they're like, apparently there's also similar rumblings in South Ossetia as well.
And then another odd thing was Russia's concerned that maybe Ukraine could invade Transnistria and give it back to Moldova. So
why would they do that? They're already stretched pretty thin.
Well, it is an extra front that would have less to worry about. Like, quick takeover, give it back to Moldova, and then done, if you think about it. Because in the end, it is just 1,500 troops. Ukraine, we know definitely, without doubt, even with a little minor force, could easily destroy Transnistria. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibility. And supposedly there's a massive... This is actually a big concern. From what I heard, there's a massive weapons depot somewhere in Transnistria. And if it blew up, it would do a explosion equivalent to Hiroshima in terms of power.
Oh shit!
That would be the biggest non-nuclear explosion ever.
That would affect both. That wouldn't just affect Moldova. That would affect Ukraine and Romania. Well, and again, remember, Romania's in NATO.
Well, it wouldn't be a nuclear explosion, like I'm saying. It's like weapons, like TNT.
It'd be a normal one, but still, Moldova's a tiny little country sandwiched between Ukraine, it's at war, and Romania, that's in NATO.
Yeah, so that's like the only real concern about that right now. But so far, nothing has changed, thankfully, and hopefully it stays the same. And nothing's changed in the war whatsoever. So, what do you guys say now a year in? What do you think would happen? Moving on like another year.
You're doing bad. You're not doing good, man. Just leave. We know Putin's going to leave. And that there's now a chance that he might get psychopathic enough to go nuclear.
Oh, yeah. And that also reminds me now, as far as that you mentioned China earlier. China recently did like their own peace proposal to end this war. I don't remember all the details of it because I've read like really quickly, but I don't think it's going to work out, unfortunately, because Russia and Ukraine have irreconcilable views on this, and until massive changes in the war happens, neither side's going to give up right now. Should have probably posted a link to the peace proposal, but I didn't think about that. So I guess the only thing left we could say is, right now Russia is technically gaining territory, but it's so small and they're losing so much that it really is not even worth it. And we just hope Ukraine keeps the fight up and beats the shit out of them, and hopefully no World War III or anything like that. So I think we've talked about this enough for the 1-year anniversary. Yep. And of course, if anything massive changes in the war territory or some other more countries moving in, we'll talk about it. But unless something changes, we're going to probably stay dormant like we've done like the last few months. Alright, so now, on to the next topic.
Massive train wreck in Ohio, and the massive optic fail of every single corporate democratic idiot.
And of course, this is not the only one happened. I think one happened, a smaller one in Michigan too. And Ohio, I think, had another problem recently, so rip Ohio in that regard. And of course, someone brought up recently to talk about this. So recently, there was a massive train wreck in Ohio, and unfortunately, it was full of tankers that had very dangerous chemicals in it that basically forced an entire town to possibly evacuate. And of course, as always, it turns out the reason why this derailment happened was simple deregulation. Are you surprised? Because I most certainly am not. So let's watch David Dole's video on it.
The Republican Party got about $6 million from the rail industry.
And corruption too, which we'll get to in a little bit.
For Trump to repeal the rule.
It's been 10 days since a freight train carrying hazardous material derailed and exploded in the village of East Palestine,
exploded too.
Ohio.
That's even worse.
And now we're getting
like now, because I don't know about you, but I grew up watching a whole bunch of like train stuff growing up, like accidents and all of that. And oh boy, when like tanker stuff explodes, they cause massive explosions. Like, do you remember the massive train wreck that happened in a town in Quebec 10 years ago almost?
I've heard something about it.
Yeah, in the middle of the night, a train on its own rolled off its brakes, went down to a city in Quebec at like 70 miles an hour in a bend and caused a massive derailment. And it caused a massive explosion that pretty much destroyed, like, I think up to like 40% of the town.
Damn.
So yeah, when all those tankers explode, they make massive explosions that could probably only be topped by like the biggest non-nuclear explosion ever to happen in World War I, if you remember that. And then, of course, possibly what we just said earlier about what could happen possibly in Moldova.
Here a picture of the policy failure.
And then, of course, it's not only the explosion, it's also what they released, which we're going to probably hear to a bit, because the shit that I think I remember hearing is very, very bad.
That led up to this.
Of course.
This is a case that very likely could have been prevented if the proper protections were in place. And I'm going to get to a video shortly here explaining a bit of that, and then I'll get to more around this company, just how much money they have made while laying people off, causing even more of a safety risk.
Remember when we said, remember the union strike that almost happened around Christmas that we covered?
Yep.
That's why they needed to win instead of Biden and the Democrats forcing them to give up.
Let me play this video here. This was produced by Armand Aviram. And you'll see David Sorobin here. This is from the Lever. This is a great video breaking down the policy failures that very likely led to what happened in East Palestine.
We just saw in the middle of the country a giant chemical fireball, 100-foot flames, and very few people asking questions about what led up to this. So there was a derailment in 2012 in New Jersey,
releasing 20,000 gallons of dangerous chemicals and noxious gas into the air.
There's children in the town that are being affected by this.
And there was pressure on regulators to do something about those kinds of trains. And so the Obama administration had a rule proposed to better regulate these trains. The National Transportation...
One thing that could help is, I don't know, maybe upgrade the entire American railway infrastructure to be like electric or maybe Megalev. That would definitely make it a lot safer.
Safety board.
For electric, well, we've got a lot of electric trains in Australia. We did that.
Plus,
we've electrified our entire suburban and even a little bit further.
Plus, you guys are probably more regulated.
Yep.
Because you guys are more civilized than America, as we all know.
Told
yes, our country is not a shithole like America is.
Not just oil, they should cover what's known as Class 2 chemicals. And the chemical industry lobbyists went to work pressuring the regulatory agency to limit the definition of what a high-hazard flammable train is. Limit it in a way that the train in Ohio, that kind of train ended up not being classified as a high-hazard flammable train.
The NTSB closely monitoring 4 cars that are filled with vinyl chloride. It has been found to be linked to cancer.
Trains that were subject to this rule,
cancer too. Oh boy.
We're going to be required to use a special kind of new braking system to try to deter or at least reduce the damage from derailments.
ECP delivers the unmatched performance of air brakes with the precision of electronic communications.
Most trains in the country are still using technology from the Civil War era. But the moment the government was considering making it a mandate, the railroad industry's changed its tune. It cited cost concerns to pressure against that rule.
We want to see federal regulations when they're necessary, not just in reaction to a headline in the Washington Post.
Obama's rule included that measure to expand the larger use of those brakes on the nation's rail system. But in that 2016 election year, the Republican Party got about $6 million from the rail industry. And Senate Republicans started beating the drum for Trump to repeal the rule. Donald Trump repealed the brake rule so that the industry does not have to even start to use these kinds of brakes.
So there you go, people. That's what happened. The trains, the majority of trains and probably rolling stock in America use brakes that are used from the Civil War, which are air brakes, if you all don't know. And they're not really that strong, but like the only option back then. And remember, trains can take over a mile before they finally stop and stuff like that. So there's a new kind of brake being made that's much more powerful. But Obama actually had, for once in a while, actually a good idea to mandate trains now have this. But of course, the railway industry does not like regulation that costs them 1 penny. So they, thanks to corruption too, they spent millions of dollars to help the Republicans win in 2016. And when Trump got in, he got rid of that rule. So now, railway companies can do whatever they want again. Shows regulation and corruption mean, deregulation, corruption are the problem, and that's why you need to have government regulation for the win, as always.
One former Federal Railroad Administration regulator told us that these...
If they had the brakes, which would be mandated, so they would do a massive overhaul over years to fix this problem. And this thing was back like in 2015 when Obama did this mandate. This probably wouldn't have happened. So eat shit for all of you that want deregulation.
ECP brakes would have mitigated a disaster like this. And we just learned today, after the publication of our story, federal officials told us that this train did not have those brakes on the train.
All right, so before I go even deeper into this, I just want to give credit there to The Lever. The Lever does absolutely fantastic investigative reporting. They are breaking stories. They do far more than the vast majority of what the mainstream press does, and they're leading the charge on this story and exposing why this happened. So just essentially summarize that video there. David Sirota tweets out, chemical lobbyists got Obama officials to exempt trains like the one in Ohio from hazmat safety rules. Rail lobbyists got Trump officials to repeal rules requiring better brakes on trains. And Secretary Pete hasn't moved to fix the safety rules. So there's blame to go around.
Judge has been
blame on the Obama administration, blame on the Trump administration, and blame on Biden and Pete Buttigieg for not patching what they can do with their power. They don't need Congress to change these rules. So before I get more on that, this is just another one of these companies that are absolutely disgusting. So this is an article from October 2021. Unions allege Norfolk Southern, that is the freight company that had this derailment, that their job cuts saddled engineers with other duties. So again, this is October 2021. Just a few months later, in March, here's what they did. Norfolk Southern announces new $10 billion stock repurchase program.
Making record profits while firing workers. That's not what you're supposed to do with all that money. You're supposed to treat your employees well. Oh, wait, that's right. Corporations and companies are greedy, and that's why unions and regulations required to prevent this from happening?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh.
So $10 billion.
This is the shithole America, where corporations are mandated by law to fuck over their workers and make sure to kill some of them as well.
In stock buybacks to artificially inflate their own stock, just months after laying countless people off and saddling their existing employees with more duties. Again, putting even more of a strain on the system and potentially causing even further safety risks. It's all about as much money for the executives as possible, regardless of what impact that may cause, and this derailment is another example of that. So The Lever has a larger piece on the Pete Buttigieg inaction on this. Quote, there will be more derailments. So in the aftermath of a fiery Ohio train derailment, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg's department has not moved to reinstate an Obama-era safety rule aimed at expanding the use of better braking technology, even though a former federal safety official recently warned Congress that without the better brakes, quote, there will be more derailments and more releases of hazardous materials.
And you also is really sickening too. Idiots like in the oil industry have used this argument about, see, trains are unsafe. That's why we should use pipes instead and do Keystone XL and all that, even though statistically, oil...
Instead, transportation regulators have now been considering a rail industry-backed proposal that could weaken existing brake safety rules. So while this derailment's going on, they're considering actually weakening rules around braking and
more deregulation. Why am I not
one brake safety
surprised?
proposal currently under consideration by federal rail regulators and industry-backed rule relaxing brake testing requirements. In 2021, in response to a petition from the Association of American Railroads, the FRA proposed amendments to existing safety standards that would reduce the frequency of brake testing on freight cars equipped with an electronic inspection tracking system. The changes under consideration are staunchly opposed by 5 major rail unions.
Because of course they
it's
are.
Not enough to already put
because they love
the lives of countless people at risk
with and worker death.
These derailments, the lack of safety that is in place, but they have to go even further to try and save even a few more cents, because that is how capitalism operates.
And that's why capitalism is cringe and needs to be regulated.
Let's get to this interview with David Sirota. So there's a piece in this interview that I really want to share here. This goes to further exposing how disgusting this company is.
The railroad industry cited an amount, $3 billion. Putting these brakes on the trains that would be required to have them would cost a total of $3 billion. Now, that's about 2 weeks of operating revenue that the train system pulls in, 2 weeks of revenue in a single year, meaning it's a tiny amount of money when you're talking about the entire rail industry, but they didn't want to spend it. And my guess is they didn't want to spend it because they presume that their current safety systems are fine. And if their current safety systems fail, that governments, whether local, state, or federal, will pick up the tab for the cleanup, for the disaster. That cost is socialized to the public, not internalized by the private company.
Corporate socialism, as we call it. I thought you conservatives are against socialism, but your policies lead to corporations being socialist. So. Destroyed once again.
They made a cost-benefit analysis that, maybe the brakes would make things safer. They're the ones who actually said these brakes would improve safety. But in their cost-benefit analysis, it still wasn't worth it to them for their profit interests.
Privatizing the gains and socializing the losses. This is across
that's
industries.
corporate
This is how
socialism for
capitalism
you.
operates without any proper regulation in place. That's how it's meant to operate. Because why would they follow the rules? Why would they do anything if they don't have to? If it's going to save them some money, if it's going to mean a higher profit margin and more money for the shareholders, why would they bother putting any of these restrictions in place when they don't need to? That's why you need proper regulation around these industries. Otherwise, this keeps happening. And man, the amount of lobbying, the amount of corporate greed, the amount of just absolute corruption at the heart of policymaking is showcased in this single story. Now, a couple last things here. So there's of course some pushback in defense of people to judge because people are crazy. So Patrick here in this quote tweet says, Congress reinstates laws. Cabinet members can only enforce existing laws. They are law enforcers, not lawmakers. Ignoring the fact that the Trump administration, without Congress, changed the rule from the Obama administration around the braking. David Sirota here replies saying, people judge is the transportation secretary. The transportation secretary has safety rule-making authority. This kind of excuse is pathetic, inaccurate, and yet sadly common among those who think their job after a chemical explosion is to defend a cabinet secretary. It's very important to be objective when looking at a story like this. Yes, of course, you can see the direct connection between the Trump administration and the lack of safety when it comes to braking. Using Civil War era braking still on trains, to me, it's comically insane. Yes, you can make that direct connection. You can also make the connection to the Obama administration, and then also make the connect about the rules around chemicals and how the lobbying around that ensured that there would be no extra protections for those class 2 chemicals that could cause an explosion like this or this deadly impact. But there's also the current administration that has the power to do something now and haven't. Like, when I first read this connection, my immediate thought is, why, as the Biden administration, why don't you come in and immediately look at what Trump did and what you can undo, what makes sense to undo? Maybe he did some things that made sense, but why not look at what he did and see, hey, we can change this back when it comes to certain rules around
because
climate
he's
protections.
senile
He
old man
reversed a bunch of stuff just unilaterally because he couldn't his power.
why.
Why not look at all of those? Reverse all of those back. Look at rules like this, reverse this back.
Only being
Do you
kept
think this is the
alive
first thing
by
you would
the
do
dark side
when
of
coming
the
in?
force.
If you really are concerned about the impact that Trump had,
But then again,
as you
so
claim
is
to while
Trump
you're running
and
for
a bunch
president,
of the
why wouldn't this be the first thing you do? Is look at what Trump did and
and
reverse what he
corporate
did.
Democrats as well. All the
And for
really
anyone to
old, a
defend
lot of the really
not
old
doing
ones.
that, to defend the
are
inaction here,
literally the
just to
dark
me
side of
is
the force is keeping
insane.
them
You
alive.
have to look at these stories objectively. You can't just look at one side and just blankly criticize one side without looking at what can be done now. Last thing here.
But Joel, if we do that, we're accused of helping Republicans win, remember?
More information coming out around the chemicals that were released. This is actually from today. A local news report here. Let me share a bit of this.
We now know 3 more chemicals that were on board the Norfolk Southern train that derailed here in East Palestine just over a week ago. And we're being told that some of those chemicals are dangerous.
We basically nuked the town with chemicals so we could get a railroad open.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency sent a letter to Norfolk Southern stating that ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, ethylexoacrylate, and isobutylene were also in the rail cars that were derailed, breached, or on fire. Caggiano says ethylexoacrylate is especially worrisome. He says it's a carcinogen, and contact with it can cause burning and irritation in the skin and eyes. Breathing it in can irritate the nose, throat, and cause coughing.
And of course, how big the explosion was and the smoke cloud, that probably covers the whole entire town. So unsafe to live there till that's all cleaned up. Oh, of course, there was also another controversy recently that supposedly EPA might have had like another 9/11 moment where they said it's safe when it wasn't to go back there.
And shortness of breath. Isobutylene is also known to cause dizziness and drowsiness when inhaled.
I was kind of surprised that when they quickly told the people they can go back home, but then said if they feel like they want their homes tested, they can have them tested. I would have far rather they did all the testing.
Caggiano says it's possible some of these chemicals could still be present in homes and on objects until you clean them thoroughly.
There's a lot of what ifs. We're going to be looking at this thing 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line and wondering, gee, cancer clusters could pop up. Well water could go bad.
Caggiano recommends anyone who's in the East Palestine area get a health checkup. He says get a record now of where your health stands so that moving forward you have documentation of any possibly related effects to the train derailment. In East Palestine, Jennifer Rodriguez, WKBN 27 First News.
Cleaning is going to take
that
a long time.
Last piece of advice I think is fantastic. If you are in the area, absolutely get a health checkup. Ensure there is a record of where your health is now. That way,
Clean it up. They love poisoning everyone as well.
Your health going in the future, you have that record of it. The only thing this piece misses, and this is local news generally, is the actual connecting to a failure in policy and who to blame in terms of administrations, in terms of these companies and their lack of safety around it, their total lack of consideration for actual people. All local news, unfortunately, lacks that extra step. But this is why it's important to support places like The Lever and ensure reporting like this, investigative reporting like this, continues, and that there is someone holding these companies and these administrations accountable. So this also goes to, I have a hard time imagining that anything will actually get done here, that people to judge and the Biden administration will actually move to enact any of these rules unless there is some real pressure put in place by mainstream media outlets. So occasionally you have a story like this that is investigated by a few individuals that does blow up into a bigger story, that does get proper coverage and does lead to some actual change. Let's hope this is one of those cases.
So yeah, what do you have to say about this?
Not a surprise, but It's a horrible tragedy, but it's not a surprise. The whole existence of a lot of these mega corporations was purely to destroy things.
All you had to do was regulate and end corruption, and none of this shit happens. This doesn't really happen in other countries because they don't have this problem. How hard is it for people to understand? Jeez.
Extremely.
So now, what do you want to talk about next?
Oh, that would be... GOP wants to ban Trump from debates.
And I just heard about this today, and I think it was a video from Kyle, so I have no idea what this is about. So, let's see what this is, shall we?
All right, guys, welcome to the show.
No, Kyle, no. I told you stop doing that. I hate that intro you do now. It's painful.
That's a fun one. We'll get to that a little bit later. All right, without further ado, let's dive into it here. So this is a spicy little piece of news, man. This is a spicy piece of news. The Associated Press is reporting that Republicans are going to adopt a loyalty pledge for their debate participants. So in other words, what that means is the RNC is saying, in order for you to participate in the Republican primary presidential debates, you need to promise, I'm going to support the eventual nominee. Now, the reason that they're doing this is very clear.
To stop Trump.
They fear, hey man, if he doesn't win, he's going to tank this whole party. He's just going to go balls to the wall, ripping whoever our candidate is, likely DeSantis if it's not Trump. And he's going to raise hell. He might even run as an independent or run third party, and we do not want that to happen. We cannot have that happen. So they're trying to get some level of assurance.
Unless you're us on the left, and then we do want Trump to do that.
Here's my theory on it, and this is not in the article, this is my speculation. My sense of it is, I don't think this is other Republican politicians. I don't think it's like Ronna McDaniel, who's the head of the RNC, who was herself a Trump cuck, who's doing this. I think it's the big money donors behind the RNC. I think it's the Republican billionaires who have made clear time and time again now, they're done with Trump. They don't want Trump to win, whether it's the Koch brothers or Mercer or whoever. They're like, hey, we got to move past this. They all want probably DeSantis, maybe they'd be cool with like Nikki Haley too, even though she has like no chance of winning. So they are trying to, twist the arm of the RNC, because who does the RNC work for? The billionaires and the corporations. And so it's the billionaires and the corporations who are like, we can't have Trump. He's too unhinged. He's too crazy. We don't think he can win a general election. We can't do it. And so they're going to implement this move. Now, in 2016, they had a loyalty pledge, but it was not tied to the debates. The difference is they're going to say you're not allowed on the debate stage unless you agree to support the eventual nominee. So, hilariously, they go on in the article to say, yeah, this is unenforceable, but maybe it'll bring us together or something. Okay,
like
the
Trump
exact
gives
opposite
two
is going
shits
to happen.
about
It's just going to piss Trump off more. So what's likely to happen? Look, I'll tell you, it's very simple. Trump is either going to come in like a bull in a china shop and just say, this is stupid, this is dumb, nobody should do this, and then eventually they will scrap it. Or he'll be like, I agree to this completely. And then if he loses, he won't abide by it at all. He'll go back on that immediately. And guys, this already happened in 2016. Early on, he signed a loyalty pledge and said, yeah, I'll support whoever the nominee is. And then later on, when he was asked in a debate about it, he goes, I don't know if I support the nominee, it depends on how you treat me. So it's so funny that they think, like, at this late date, you think that basically an unenforceable gentleman's agreement with Donald Trump is going to protect you? It's not going to protect you at all.
No.
And it's funny because, if anything, this article had the opposite impact on me in that I see
Trump's
that
a liar, everything on fire.
And he cares about himself.
Way.
And
that
he
if anything,
can't ever
I think it
lose
makes
in
it
his
more
eyes.
likely
He can't
Trump's
be
gonna
ever
win.
second
Look,
place or
the
anything.
Republican Party, the establishment officials, they actually need to learn
He's
from
too insecure to even look like a loser.
Now, the Democratic leadership, I hate them, and I hate what they did to Bernie Sanders. But you can't deny that what they did worked for their own goals. They wanted to destroy the one candidate who was actually going to help people and fix the country. And they did. So, 2016, WikiLeaks, we got all the information about how Hillary and the DNC were putting their thumb on the scale for Hillary, screwing Bernie over in a variety of different ways. Look at your questions before the debate. You guys know the whole spiel. We went through it. 2020, what happened? Biden was getting draxed. Biden was, down and out for the count. He was sleeping or unconscious or both. He finished like 27th in Iowa. And then eventually, at the very last minute, before like a Super Tuesday, a day when all these different votes in all these different states come in, what happened? Mayor Pete, Amy Klobuchar, Bet on My Stork, all these people dropped out and endorsed Biden. And they consolidated the establishment lane vote, and then that's why Bernie lost. If they weren't highly organized, if Obama didn't make that phone call, which was all the speculation behind the scenes, if Obama made that phone call to say, okay, it's time to step aside and we'll make a deal, then Bernie would have won. And so that high level of organization among Democratic leadership, that led to the defeat of the only good candidate, Bernie Sanders. On the Republican side, ironically, because the party and their policies are more authoritarian, their approach when it comes to the primary is weirdly less authoritarian. Trump was able to curb stomp the Republican establishment and win in 2016, and then now they're trying in such an ineffectual and impotent way to stop him the next time. And again, I think if anything, this leads me to believe like they don't have the chops to take him down. They just don't have the ability.
Well, they can't because the voters want him.
What they need to do, if they actually want to be there, I told you this before, DeSantis, all the big money Republican donors, and all the other potential Republican candidates, and the Republican candidates like Nikki Haley, for example, they all need to Get in a room and just make a deal, dole out positions. Nikki, you want to be VP? Fine, I'll pick you as my VP. You want Secretary of State? Whoever, Pompeo, that's what you get. You go through all of it, give everybody a spot so you have a 1 versus 1 debate, a 1 versus 1 race. And in a 1v1 race with Trump and DeSantis, there you actually have a race. It's kind of a coin flip, could go either way. But if it's Trump, DeSantis, and 7 other candidates that nobody cares about, all they have to do is take 1%, 2%, 6% here and there, and then Trump wins. And that's what it's shaping up to be right now. So how do you think Trump's going to react to, hey, we're trying to kick you off the debate stage, dog? How do you think he's going to react? Again, either he's going to rip this to shreds and make them back off of it, or he's going to say, sure, I'll sign the loyalty pledge, and then he'll just go back on it if he loses. Because we all know, look, again, if he loses in the primary, what's going to happen? He's either going to run third party or independent, or he's just going to rip to shreds whoever the candidate is, because he's petty, he's narcissistic, and it's more about how he feels slighted than anything else. He's not committed to an ideology or policy agenda, and so he's not going to realize, hey, this is whoever wins the Republican nomination is closer to my beliefs. I could see him in a weird scenario, like helping Biden colossally by shitting on the Republican candidate 24/7 in a scenario where he loses the primary. So, look, yummy in my tummy in that sense. But the reason this is so telling is it looks like the Republican big money donors are trying to move past Trump by any means necessary, but it also looks like the Republican politicians and the top officials just don't have the chops and don't know what to do with him because he's a bull in a china shop. And so it'll be interesting, man. It'll be interesting. Let's see what other rules they try to come up with to shiv him, and let's see how he reacts. I am looking forward to some more unhinged truths coming from Truth Social. Hey, y'all.
Honestly, though, Kyle, that
Convention
really
hero.
wasn't banning him. It wasn't even really like a soft ban. Like, even if he did this, we know he's just gonna reject it, and I'm pretty sure the Republican primary aren't gonna do anything to actually stop him either. So that was pretty weird. Didn't even really sound like a ban. Kind of weak thing on Kyle's part. But anyways, what did you have to say about this?
Not that it matters.
Yeah, what you had to say about this?
Because we know what he's going to do. He's going to pretend, and then if DeSantis somehow manages to beat him, then he's going to just run third party anyway.
Yeah, 'cause I'm pretty sure our views aren't going to be the same as we said bumps ago. Right now, if Trump did get the nomination, right now I think Biden not only would win, but win more comfortably, so he'd lose in that regard. Yep. And then if DeSantis got the nomination, while I think he'll have a better chance than Trump to beat Biden or whoever the Democrat nominee is, Trump is going to fuck DeSantis over because he can't take losing. He's going to be like, if I can't win, no one can win. Run third party and fuck DeSantis over and make the Democratic nominee pretty much guaranteed to win.
Yep.
And in the mum sense, I still have not been convinced otherwise. Like, the only thing Republicans can only hope for right now is either Biden completely shits the bed to be like 2016 levels bad, or Trump just dies, and then Trump supporters have no option but to go with someone else. That's like really the only thing they got. Alright, so I guess that's it for this episode. And then what to talk about next?
Next up will be... yes, the Cop City.
This actually happened a month ago, but we never got to cover it because there were more important things to cover. So this is quite old info. So anyways, this came up back in January, I believe it was, where there was another police shooting of some black person. I have no idea, because I never looked up if it was like a George Floyd situation where it was like obviously wrong what they did. So I can't say about that, but it caused massive protests in Atlanta, all that. And it turns out there's something else that's going on too. The Atlanta police is basically building a cop city, like buildings for like cops to live in, I guess. And while I might explain where it might not be as bad as people on the left make it sound to be, what they're doing, how they're making it though, is definitely wrong. So anyways, here we go.
I want to talk about a story that is truly at the intersection of so many issues: environmentalism, indigenous people's rights, police militarization, and the over-policing of majority black cities, the American police state, so on and so forth. That story is Cop City. Now, fortunately, people are finally starting to pay attention to Cop City, but the heightened awareness of Cop City comes at the expense of one activist's life. Manuel Terran, who is a 26-year-old queer Afro-Venezuelan forest defender who was killed by police on January 18th following a deadly raid on Cop City. Now, in order to understand why Manuel was caught in the crossfire in the first place, we need to understand what Cop City is and why these activists were opposing it so vehemently. Kendall Glenn of Decaturus explains, Cop City is an 85-acre police/fire training facility located in DeKalb County's South River Forest. The location has historically been the old Atlanta prison farm site and a police shooting range.
And before we continue on, stuff like this cops and the military have done before. Make, like, train areas to train. Hell, the military even made, like, empty villages in the Nevada desert to drop nukes on to see the effects on damage on the buildings and all that. So, this doesn't sound too bad, but it's going to get worse later on.
Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms announced the plan to turn the location into a state-of-the-art training facility in April of 2021. The project will cost approximately $90 million, and the area will feature a burn tower, space for...
Which, hey, is for firefighters. I mean, you want firefighters to be trained well, right? Because, like, people on the left never seem to bring this up ever in that regard.
For high-speed chases, a helicopter pad, a shooting range...
Anything cop in a lot of left eyes is automatically bad, remember?
And a mock village.
Because this, by itself, just making a training facility for police and firefighters, that's a good thing. I know a lot on the left are not going to like hearing that, but that is a good thing. But, of course, we're going to get into a little bit of a problem later on.
Yeah. Now, if that doesn't already sound positively dystopian...
Mike, it's not dystopian. That's always been a thing. You're just being, like, too anti-cop to have that you have a problem with it. But now what you're about to bring up, too, is an actual problem.
To you, well, destroying this forest is going to have catastrophic impacts on the community because this forest is essentially a shield that protects them from anthropogenic climate change. In an article for the...
Which, of course, that's not good, cutting down trees, because that's going to make fighting climate change a little bit harder. And also, remember, forests also help shade, too, in the summers. Of course, the thing I don't like is, even though it is true, I just don't like how they're implying that it affects minority communities. Like, climate change is going to affect everyone. And cutting down these trees is going to be less shade for non-minorities too. Like, why do you have to, like, always emphasize that? Why can't you say it affects everyone? Like, come on.
The Atlanta Voice,
because
Scott
it's a
Roberts
mix
explains.
of, systemic and existential, because they're going like, this is an example of existential racism instead of just systemic.
Clear-cutting the forest will have devastating effects on the environment, including worsened air quality and flooding in the predominantly black neighborhoods of southeast Atlanta. Furthermore, the Atlanta Police Department's current and future use of chemical weapons will poison the soil and the waters, endangering Atlantans' health. So, needless to say,
I can understand where he's coming from.
But you still should be a little bit more universal with your lange, Mike. It really comes across as
clearing out this forest in order to create a massive military-like training facility for cops isn't just going to lead to more brutalization disproportionately of black and brown people. It's also taking away a shield that will defend them against climate change. And to add insult to injury, Cop City is being constructed on land that was stolen from indigenous people and then subsequently turned into a slave plantation. The land belonged to the Muskogee people, who referred to it as the Wulani Forest for generations. Beginning in the early 1820s, the Muskogee were forcibly displaced from the area through a series of treaties. The removal continued into the 30s. The land then became a plantation for the remainder of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. In 1911, the city of Atlanta purchased the land. 10 years later, it became the Atlanta City Prison and Dairy Farm. From 1922 to the late 80s, the area ran as a prison farm. In 1990, the city began auctioning off farm animals and equipment, and soon after, public notice was issued to discuss future plans for the site. Now, make no mistake.
So it sounds more like it's a government-owned land.
About it, the city knows that a majority of the residents are against the creation of Cop City. They just don't care. And they also know how important this forest is for its population. Back in 2017, the Planning Department of Atlanta designated the South River Forest as the city's lungs. And this was because of the environmental significance of that forest. Now, because it was so important, they initially planned to turn the forest into an urban park. However, that idea was scrapped in favor of Cop City, and here we are now.
But yeah, that's more of a valid reason to be against Cop City cutting down this forest. Not the excuse that Mike's coming up with that honestly sounds more like he's just so anti-cop he doesn't want them to be doing training whatsoever, which needs to happen. Because we've seen that a lot over the years where a lot on the left are just so anti-cop, they're against like basic training and all that. Like, they just want cops gone. And unfortunately, Mike seems to be one of those people.
So activists have been pushing back against the construction of Cop City in an effort to protect the South River Forest and prevent even more brutalization of black and brown people by police. And to resist, they've established encampments in the forest and have occupied it for prolonged periods of time. But cops, however, have been trying to forcibly remove the protesters for quite some time to no avail, and as a result, their tactics have become increasingly violent as time progresses. And during a raid on January 18th, one activist was shot dead. And that activist is Manuel Terran. Now, a Georgia state trooper was also shot and hospitalized, with police claiming that Terran shot him. And Unicorn Riot reports that witnesses heard 10 to 12 gunshots all at once. So it was a fairly chaotic situation, and police are claiming that Manuel fired first, but the evidence that they released thus far does not substantiate that claim, and there's no body camera footage of the incident as well, since no other officer was close enough to capture the incident. Now, Georgia's Bureau of Investigation has released this photograph of a Smith & Wesson 9mm handgun that they claimed was in Terran's possession at the time that he was killed, and ballistics experts confirmed that the bullets from this gun do in fact match the wound of the cop that was shot, but activists are disputing the cop's narrative and calling for an independent investigation by an impartial third party to figure out what really happened. And activists are rightfully skeptical of the cop's narrative because they've been caught lying to justify the use of deadly force against protesters in the past. For example, as Unicorn Riot reports,
unfortunately, they're probably not going to win either way. That there's no way to like verify like body cams or all that. You know, the courts are going to always side with the cops on that. That's like how it always is, unfortunately.
In June of 2022, Atlanta police officers were caught on radio traffic.
And I mean, here's another thing too that I think a lot of left are not consider. Maybe, just maybe, the cops were right and justified. Maybe he was the one shot first. We don't know, but that could be a possibility that you should consider possibly happening. But of course, they're not going to because anti-cop.
Justifying the use of lethal force against protesters who used Molotov cocktails to defend themselves.
Ultimately anti-cop.
And the forest in the midst of a police raid. No forest defenders have been charged for use of Molotovs or incendiary devices. Quote, "I told you deadly force encounter," said one officer. "That's why I brought it up. As long as we're all on the same page, Molotov cocktails, a deadly force encounter. A deadly force encounter is a situation in which cops are legally allowed to shoot and kill." Yeah, so that right there is why activists are rightfully skeptical of the cops' narrative about Terran. If they lied before to justify the use of lethal force against these protesters, what's to stop them from lying again to justify the use of lethal force against Manuel?
Well,
right?
I mean, you have to have
now, me
evidence, too, that they
personally,
did lie.
I fundamentally distrust cops.
Well,
so I automatically...
Let me replay because Mike just admitted.
Now, me personally, I fundamentally distrust cops. So
well, yeah. So there you go. You just admit it. You think cops are wrong no matter what, basically, Mike.
Yeah, which is extreme.
Yeah, cops do a lot of bad things, but you can't just say they're wrong no matter what. That's as stupid as like American diabolism. You have to wait for all the evidence because it could have been possible that maybe he did shoot first, and of course that's self-defense on the cops in that regard. But of course, we don't know, and who knows? We might never know. But you shouldn't just like automatically just assume that they're in the wrong because you don't know that.
I automatically just assume that they're lying every single time that they open their mouths, and I work backwards from that conclusion if and only if they provide the public with an overwhelming amount of evidence to substantiate the claims that they're making. But with respect to this story, they have not done that, and I simply have not been swayed. So I remain at my default position of distrust cops.
Well, I mean, you really should because there's no evidence to say that they're in the wrong either. Like, there's no evidence that either side's right. So it's kind of like you just gotta be neutral on it, like I am.
And assume that they're lying. And short of an independent investigation, local activists don't seem to be buying it as well. And they're not letting police demonize Manuel Terran. And it seems like the community also isn't buying the official narrative from police. There was a vigil that was held for Manuel, and that turned into an impromptu march. And that impromptu march ended up turning into protests across Atlanta. And those are still going on till this day, with activists calling for justice for Manuel and an end to the construction of Cop City, and some protests have turned into riots, which has predictably been the overall focus of media in an effort to obscure the overall message of these activists. But it's important to recenter this conversation.
Remember what happened with the George Floyd riots, how everyone immediately turned on you? Like, we saw the polls, we've covered multiple times. Like, the BLM protests when George Floyd died, before the protest happened, like, overwhelmingly everyone was against the cops in that regard. But then once the riot happened, it immediately flipped. You need to not do rioting, period. It makes you look bad. You gotta look good.
You maybe could sneak a little bit of looting in of like really large corporations. Just a little, but not like too much.
Conversation around the activists' message and not the message of the media or the cops. Cop City is an absolute abomination, and the forest defenders who are
well, it's not really. It's not good to cut down a forest, but it's not like the absolute like worst thing ever. That's your anti-cop bias.
Protecting the environment and the city are unquestionably heroes in my opinion.
Cops
but
and firefighters
some of the forest defenders are being charged with domestic terrorism and criminal trespassing, because if you refuse to allow cops to bulldoze this forest, to create Cop City, to brutalize that very community that they claim to be serving and protecting, then you're apparently a domestic terrorist. But the real act of terrorism, in my opinion, is the destruction of this forest in the first place. Now, one last thing that I want to leave you with is this. There's a GoFundMe for Manuel's family, and at the time that I record this video, they are halfway towards their goal of $100,000, so I'd encourage you to consider donating if you're able to. But either way, if you didn't know about Cop City, now you know. And unfortunately, one activist, their death led to people knowing about Cop City. So don't let that sacrifice be in vain. People need to spread the word and acknowledge that Cop City is a disgrace, but it's not necessarily a shocking thing to see in the dystopian country that we live in. It's just, it's sickening, but
making a train
here we are.
facility in a bad place.
Yep.
So yeah, what do you guys say about that? I don't think it should be built because I don't want this forest cut down because it's vitally needed. But it's not the end of the world if a train facility is built. Like, if this was built somewhere else, I don't see any problem with it whatsoever being built. Because cops and firefighters, guess what, guys? If you all, and here's another thing too, because Hunter Avalon brought this up recently. Like, if you want cops to be better, they have to do training to be better. How are you going to train them? They have to have facilities to train.
The problem is at the moment is that cop training needs to be built back up from scratch.
Exactly, but you need to have train facilities for them to train. And maybe there's not enough, or maybe there is none in this part of Atlanta. Like, a lot of times you on the left have a problem with cops are like so extreme you actively hurt yourselves. With the rioting, and of course, being so anti-cop that you think they're always wrong no matter what. Or against train facilities that would make them less likely to do police brutality and all that stuff. Like, you all need to cool out with that. You have to be more neutral on this, for crying out loud. It's ridiculous. Just like when they always keep defending people that actually did do stuff in the wrong thanks to body cameras proving them wrong. Like we had with Mike Brown, if you remember that. He was in the wrong, but all the reports all showed what was the place? I can't remember what that area was called in Missouri, but it also showed that the cops in that city in Missouri were like some of the most racist cops in the country. So both things are in the wrong. It's not that hard to do, but you have to be objective on that. And a lot of left, unfortunately, are just not good at it, to the point where Mike admit that he is biased against cops.
Yeah.
That's pretty unfortunate. All right, so now on to the next topic.
That would be SCOTUS trying to destroy the internet.
And this is a new thing. Actually doing a new ruling soon on possibly removing Section 230 on the internet, which is something Trump gladly wants to happen, even though it actually would hurt him immensely doing it, which is funny enough. Now, we're going to watch this video on that from Mike, as there actually seems to be maybe some optimism that maybe it would be in a better spot.
So here we go.
I mean, we're a court. We really don't know about these things. These are not like the 9 greatest experts on the internet.
You just listened to Associate Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan joke about how the Supreme Court may not necessarily be the best place to make sweeping decisions about something that they don't entirely understand.
Exactly. Most of these people are old fucks that grew up long before the internet and don't understand shit.
And that sentiment right there, I think, encapsulates the broader view that the justices had towards Section 230 in the case of Gonzalez v. Google. And court watchers seem to agree that the court is really apprehensive about making any sweeping changes here. For example, The Hill reports that the justices seemed puzzled during oral arguments. The LA Times deduced that the justices seemed wary of weakening Section 230. And the
I mean, that's a good sign. Less likely to get rid of Section 230. I would talk about Section 230, but I'm going to wait for a little bit because I think maybe Mike will cover
Washington Post gathered that they seem to want to move more cautiously with regard to this particular case. Now, if you watched my coverage of this last week, you'll know that I was sounding the alarm because I was very worried that the Supreme Court justices wouldn't necessarily understand what's being argued here. They don't have a good grasp of what the internet even is and why it's a public utility and why Section 230 is absolutely necessary for the internet itself. But it seems as if the Supreme Court justices actually understand the gravity of their decision should they choose to side with the plaintiffs here. Now let's go to the Washington Post, where they're going to give us a broad overview of the justices' reaction to the oral arguments that they heard today. Supreme Court justices suggested Tuesday that they might move cautiously in their first examination of the federal law that protects internet companies from lawsuits concerning platforms posting of content from third parties.
And for all of you who don't know, this would be applied to like YouTube and stuff like that. So,
to everything.
I'm going to hold my tongue and wait till Mike covers it before I look like
Justice heard more than 2.5 hours of arguments regarding the claim by the family of an exchange student killed in an Islamic State attack that Google's YouTube should be liable for promoting content from the group. But justices across the ideological spectrum said they were confused by the arguments offered by the family's lawyer and worried that the court could undermine an effort by Congress to provide immunity for the platforms decades ago when lawmakers wanted to encourage the development of the internet. Now we're going to listen to a little bit more of what Elena Kagan said during questioning because I think...
All right, since he hasn't covered yet, basically Section 230 protects ISPs like YouTube from liability from like when people post stuff that they view could be problematic. Like video that incites violence and stuff like that, YouTube is not responsible for it being up there. That's the person who uploads responsibility. So that protects YouTube. But if Section 230 was removed, then they would be responsible for it, and therefore they would actively go around deleting videos and stuff like that. So that's why conservatives, you're stupid to want to get rid of Section 230 because it's going to make you more likely to get censored. Section 230 protects you from YouTube and all them deleting your shit. They're definitely going to delete your shit because a lot of stuff you say is just stupid and causes violence. So, yeah, you're bringing your own destruction if you get rid of Section 230, along with hurting us too.
That her questions here and comments kind of demonstrate the court's overall view, at least in my assessment, and that is that any changes that they make could have huge ramifications, and there's a lot of uncertainty. They don't necessarily know what is going to happen if they side with the plaintiffs. So let's listen.
Every other industry has to internalize the costs of its conduct. Why is it that the tech industry gets a pass? A little bit unclear. On the other hand, I mean, we're a court. We really don't know about these things. These are not like the 9 greatest experts on the internet. And I don't have to accept all Ms. Blatt's "the sky is falling" stuff to accept something about, boy, there is a lot of uncertainty about going the way you would have us go, in part just because of the difficulty of drawing lines in this area, and just because of the fact that once we go with you, all of a sudden, we're finding that Google isn't protected. And maybe Congress should want that system. But isn't that something for Congress to do, not the court?
I think that she did a really good job of explaining the difficulty in trying to draw these arbitrary lines. And as a liberal justice, in theory at least, you expect her to kind of want to be more rigorous in her questioning against big tech companies. But in this instance, it's not just about protecting big tech companies, it's about protecting all of us. So in order for free speech and individuals like myself to win, we need Google to win in this instance. Because
a very rare moment where we need big corporations to actually win?
Yep.
What? But yes, Google must win for our free speech rights.
This is about the internet as a whole being a public utility, and these social media platforms that exist because of these tech giants, if they are fearful of lawsuits and they think that allowing us to post content on their websites is going to lead to them going bankrupt or getting sued, then they're just not going to allow us to post. So in order for the internet to exist in the way that it is today, we need Section 230, which is essentially arguably the law that created the internet as it is today. That needs to stand. Now, one thing that the plaintiffs were arguing, at least the Solicitor General, because they are siding with the plaintiffs here, is that, well, sure, you're saying that this could open them up to a lot of lawsuits, but those lawsuits won't be won. But they're not buying it. And you may be surprised to learn who is actually siding with us here, with internet freedom. And I'm actually honestly surprised by Brett Kavanaugh of all people.
And the entire internet is deleted.
And surprisingly, if this is true, Brett Kavanaugh is actually on Google's side in this. What? That piece of shit on the right side for once?
And post continues. Kagan and Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh suggested a ruling on behalf of the Gonzalez family could unleash a wave of lawsuits. Kavanaugh did not seem persuaded when Deputy Solicitor General Malcolm L. Stewart, representing the Justice Department and siding in part with the plaintiffs, said few lawsuits would have much likelihood of prevailing. Quote, "Isn't it better to keep it the way it is?" Kavanaugh replied, "For us, to put the burden on Congress to change that, and they can consider the implications and make these predictive judgments." Justice Clarence Thomas, who has been a critic of big tech companies and the protections they receive, said Tuesday that he was unsure how YouTube could be said to be aiding and abetting terrorism when its neutral algorithms worked the same way whether a viewer was seeking information on the Islamic State or how to make rice pilaf. Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. wondered whether recommending a similar video to someone who has expressed interest in a subject is not the 21st century equivalent of a bookseller pointing a customer asking about sports books to the section of the store where they are kept. Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Kagan told Eric Schnappner, a lawyer for the Gonzalez family, that his argument about algorithmic recommendations was very broad. So at the risk of sounding overly optimistic here, because I'm still cautiously optimistic, it does seem, at least to me, as if the justices understand what's at stake here, and they realize that the
Yet they didn't realize that when it came to overruling Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Plaintiff's argument is very, very broad. Now, to give you a sense as to what the justices are responding to here, let's hear a little bit of the arguments from the plaintiffs.
I think that the task for this court is to apply the statute the way it was written. And if I might return to a point that Justice Alito made, much of what goes on now didn't exist in 1996. The statute was written to address one or two very specific problems about defamation cases. And it drew lines around certain kinds of things and protected those. It did not and could not have been written in such a way to protect everything else that might come along that was highly desirable. Congress didn't adopt a regulatory scheme. They protected a few things. It will inevitably happen, and has happened, that companies have devised practices which are maybe highly laudable, but they don't fit within the four walls of the statute.
So what he's essentially arguing is that Section 230 was originally written to protect websites from defamation, but to extend that to algorithms, something that didn't exist at the time that the law was written, that violates the law. Right? That violates the intent that the lawmakers had. So, in other words, what he's arguing is that an algorithm can, in effect, aid and abet terrorists by recommending an Islamic State video to a viewer. But the justices aren't buying that, including Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, what's remarkable about this next clip that we're going to listen to here is that Clarence Thomas was originally the only justice, to my knowledge, that was vocally against Section 230, and that's because he's a Trump sycophant, and Donald Trump was saying we should overturn Section 230. But Clarence Thomas here is not buying the argument from the plaintiffs here.
What if the YouTube, instead of automatically providing this list, which is hard, it's hard for me because I don't see this, I see these as suggestions and not really recommendations because they don't really comment on them. But what if you had to click on something like, for more like this, click here? Would that also be, as far as you're concerned, aiding and abetting?
In terms of aiding and abetting, someone comes to me and says, what's al-Baghdadi's phone number, I'd like to call him. And I give him the phone number. I'm aiding and abetting, even if I don't say, and I hope you'll join ISIS. Whether we label a recommendation or not, on our view, is not the issue here. We tried to say that in our brief.
I mean, if you call information and ask for al-Baghdadi's number and they give it to you, I don't see how that's aiding and abetting. And I don't understand how a neutral suggestion about something that you've expressed an interest in is aiding and abetting.
I'm actually shocked because I never knew that Clarence Thomas had the capacity to be reasonable, even minimally. So I agree with what he's saying here. I think that for you to claim that YouTube, in having this content there and recommending it, is tantamount to like aiding and abetting terrorists is insane. It's an insane argument that the plaintiffs are making, and I sympathize with them. I understand that they don't want this to happen to another family, right? I understand their fears here, but changing the internet, destroying the internet potentially as we know it, is not the way that you seek change. So what we're seeing here is a sort of skewing of partisan lines on the Supreme Court, because traditionally you expect the conservative justices to side with big business here and liberals to kind of be a little bit more skeptical towards big business, but both sides seem to understand here that if they side with the plaintiffs, then the internet as we know it could be a thing of the past, and that's just not necessarily something that should be done by the Supreme Court. The plaintiffs are essentially asking them to behave as legislators when this, if there is going to be a remedy at all, it needs to be in the hands of Congress. And I would agree with that. I don't think that there should be a remedy. I think that there are ways to rein in big tech, such as antitrust legislation, laws requiring more transparency, even nationalization, if you ask me. But having the Supreme Court litigate this here and make this broad change that affects all of us on the internet, I'm just not okay with that. Now, one surprise was Ketanji Brown Jackson. She, of all the justices, seems to be siding with the plaintiffs here the most. And you kind of expect liberals, in theory, to side more with the individuals who want to hold these big businesses accountable. And that's a good instinct to have, but not in this instance. So let me show you what I mean by this. So her line of questioning towards Google, the defense attorneys here, was very, very aggressive. And I don't know if she's just playing devil's advocate, but what she said kind of worried me a little bit.
If you look at the statute, it says protection for Good Samaritan blocking and screening. If you take into account Stratman Oakmont, if those things I thought were like a given. What the people who were crafting this statute were worried about was filth on the internet and the extent to which, because of that a court case and perhaps others. And so the statute is like, we want you to take these things down. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to say that just because they're on your website, it doesn't mean you're going to be held automatically liable for it. And that's C1. And to the extent you're in C2, you're trying to take it down, but you don't get them all, we're not going to hold you liable for it. That seems to me to be a very narrow scope of immunity that doesn't cover whether or not you are making recommendations or promoting or doing anything else.
What I understand the government and the petitioner to be saying is that disseminating, even 24/7 disseminating of ISIS videos is protected. The only thing that's not protected is whether you can tease out something about the organization and call it a recommendation when there is no express speech recommending it. It's just the placement of where in the order in which content appears. And that same complaint could be made about search engines. So I think under your view, search engines would not be covered because they are taking user information, targeting recommendations in the sense of they're saying, we think you would be interested in the first content as opposed to the content on, 1,692 sections. I mean, they have millions and millions of hits for any search result.
Makes no
and
sense.
if you think those are recommendations and the other side gives you no basis for distinguishing between search engines, then the statute is just very different than I think the one that Congress was talking about. Because again, if you're going to look at findings and history and policy, this is about diversity of viewpoints, jumpstarting an industry, having information flourishing on the internet and free speech.
Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that she inherently accepts the argument from the plaintiffs here, and she thinks that Section 230 should be destroyed. Perhaps she agrees with me that there needs to be more regulations on these big tech companies. I think that's a perfectly reasonable stance to take. But to get rid of Section 230, that is something that we need to protect all of us. Again, it's a little bit counterintuitive because in order for the little guy to win, we need big tech to win in this instance. Because if these companies are no longer going to allow us to publish content because they're fearful of lawsuits, then we don't have a voice on the internet. Social media as a utility, the internet as a public utility is no longer a thing. So we need big business in this one limited instance to win. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold these big tech giants accountable, right? And so Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's seemingly siding with the plaintiffs here, but we can't know for sure until the decision is released. So in conclusion, it seems as if, at least based on preliminary oral arguments that we're hearing from today, it's not as bad as I thought. The Supreme Court justices, even though they may be ignorant to the internet and technology, they understand the gravity of the situation and how their decision here can have monumental impacts on the entire internet and democracy itself. Now, this is just one case. Remember that tomorrow they're going to be hearing Twitter v. Taminow, but at least the sense that I got today from the Supreme Court is that they're not so willing to just straight up destroy the internet. And maybe that's because the conservative justices and even the liberal justices just want to inherently side with big tech. Either way, I don't care. What I care about is the result. And if them siding with big business, them siding with Google here saves Section 230 and freedom of speech on the internet, then I'm all for it. So I'm a little bit encouraged here, but cautiously optimistic to emphasize.
All right. So what do you have to say about this?
Well, hopefully this thing fails, because then this will literally put a freaking noose around the entire internet.
Yeah, hopefully so. It's just weird how, like, the majority shows that sometimes even they can do something right, just like when they denied Trump's big lie crap. Alright, so now, on to the next topic.
And now we're going back to J.K. Rowling, the terf piece of shit who probably has dead trans people in her basement.
And probably still... Oh yeah, I'm sure you've heard about the Hogwarts Legacy boycott controversy recently.
Yeah. Yes, I have. I haven't played it or given it much of a thought because I'm just not interested in it.
Well, you haven't.
Not like the whole J.K. Rowling being a terf doesn't help, but like I was just not interested in the game.
Same here. So technically we are boycotted then.
Yeah.
But because of ininterest. So I guess we're doing our part for the hive mind on Twitter and all that. They're having a meltdown over it. But anyways, of course, gotta talk about her again because she denies that she's actually transphobic. Now you're probably thinking, okay, well, let's see the evidence on that one. So here we go. Mike again. Hope you enjoy watching the turf. Be a Karen, as always.
So there is a podcast coming up featuring Harry Potter author and transphobe J.K. Rowling, and in said podcast, which we haven't been able to hear in full yet because it hasn't been released at the time that I record this video, she is going to seriously claim that she never intended to offend anyone with her transphobic comments. And if you think that she's transphobic, you're horribly mistaken. Seriously, like she's actually saying this, I'm assuming with a straight face. But here's the details, courtesy of Variety magazine. In the forthcoming podcast, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, Rowling says, what has interested me in recent years, particularly on social media, is when fans say, you've ruined your legacy. Oh, you could have been beloved forever, but you chose to say this. And I think you could not have misunderstood me more profoundly. Rowling, in the trailer for the podcast, says, I never said...
she has dead... they're dead.
that out to upset anyone, sure. However, I was not uncomfortable with getting off my pedestal. The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, to premiere February 21st, comes from the Free Press, the independent media company founded by Barry Weiss, a former op-ed writer for the New York Times. The series is hosted by Megan Phelps-Roper, who grew up in a family that were members of the Westboro Baptist Church, arguably the most obnoxious and rabid hate group in America, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. She left a life of religious extremism in 2012, according to her bio, an experience she chronicled in her memoir, Unfollow. Well, look, I'm sure that she's being completely genuine here. I'm sure that this person who tweeted out Mary Turfness is so sad to learn that people misinterpreted her rhetoric as being anti-trans. Look, honestly, nothing irritates me more than this type of disingenuous bullshit here. You're a bigot. We all know you're a bigot, so own your hatred. Just own it. Say it with your full chest. J.K. Rowling, don't be a coward, because she spends all of her time tweeting from her castle about how terrible trans people are and how they're a threat to women, and yet when she's actually questioned about her beliefs, she doesn't own it. Like the coward that she is, she feigns ignorance, and she's just so sad that people are mistaking her. Yeah, that's bullshit. Now, J.K. Rowling may be a hateful bigot, but she's not stupid, and she is savvy enough to couch her rhetoric in language that makes it seemingly less hateful to individuals who don't know any better. But when you look at what she's actually saying, when you view her associations, you can see that all she's doing is strategically giving herself plausible deniability. And I think that James Stephanie Sterling, a non-binary YouTuber, broke down her history of transphobia. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, but nonetheless, they brought the receipts. And what they have to say is important if you still are under the delusion that J.K. Rowling is not transphobic. Let's watch.
Rowling couches her hatred in plausible deniability, but her daily obsessive takes on us, her constant comparisons of trans women to men, her verbatim repetition of gender-critical talking points makes her feelings clear. She follows, is best friends with, and outright claims to be one of the many prominent TERFs, trans-exclusive radical feminists these days rebranded to gender criticals. Her slide into open fascism as a result has been horrifying. She is a fan of Matt Walsh, a fascist so into fascism that he self-describes as one, and has made a career from accusing LGBTQ+ people of the very pedophilia he himself seems to be a fan of. She's liked tweets from the abjectly abhorrent Libs of TikTok account, a notorious right-wing platform that outs queer people and is used to organise attacks against drag shows as well as threats against hospitals. She retweets unscientific drivel by queerphobes like Baroness Nicholson. She stands with Maya Forstater, who, after losing her job at a progressive organisation over demeaning anti-trans comments, has dedicated her life to combating trans rights. She once sent accidental transphobic profanity to a 9-year-old girl after pasting a comment from an anti-trans website she was reading and copying at the time. She called criticism of this censorship and authoritarianism, seeming to defend her right to rope kids into her obsession. And she is obsessive. Scroll through her Twitter and you'll find that she thinks about trans people all day, every day. She herself has fought against Scotland's gender recognition reforms, scaremongering and spreading outright lies about a law that would simply make being trans a tiny bit easier. She still has the nerve to act offended at accusations of phobia while literally campaigning against our basic rights and legal dignity. At first, she tried to keep up the mask of someone who supports trans people but just has concerns and wanted to protect women's spaces, a long-time gender-critical dog whistle. She claimed her liking of transphobic tweets was just her fingers slipping, honest, and now she's an ardent supporter of Helen Joyce.
While we're trying to get through to the decision makers, we have to try to limit the harm. And that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition. Every one of those people is basically, a huge problem to a sane world. Like if you've got people, whether they're transitioned, whether they're happily transitioned, whether they're unhappily transitioned, whether they're detransitioned, if you've got people who've dissociated from their sex in some way, every one of those people is someone who needs special accommodation. Every one of them is a difficulty.
Yeah. So in my opinion, this is not debatable. And that video goes on, so I'll link to it down below if you want to watch it. It's not debatable, okay? She's too far down the TERF rabbit hole to still be claiming that she's not actually transphobic. I mean, it's like saying, well, David Duke, he doesn't say that he's racist anymore, so maybe we should take him at his word. But it's David Duke. We've seen what he said. I mean, same thing here, right? I mean, she's let the mask slip a little bit too many times. So to claim at this point that she's not transphobic, you're either uninformed or you're purposefully trying to obfuscate her views because you agree with her and you don't like that hate label that's attributed to her and hope that it doesn't also rub off on you. But if you're going to defend her, you are defending somebody who is a TERF and a transphobe. That's a fact. Now, another element of this interview that I have to touch on is the interview itself. Now, let me just say right off the bat, I am not against platforming J.K. Rowling. She is somebody who is a billionaire, right? But if you're going to platform her, you have to do it in a responsible way so you don't inadvertently allow her to spread hate. Now, Megan Phelps-Roper is the individual who's conducting this interview, and she is a former member of the notoriously hateful Westboro Baptist Church, as the article pointed out, and you can see her here holding up a sign that says, F slurs doom nations. Yes. Now, she's since escaped the cult that she was indoctrinated into, which is commendable, and she published a book talking about how she left extremism. So the problem is, she claims that she left extremism, and I commend her for that. We can't control who raises us and what religion we're indoctrinated into, so she gets a full pass there. And if she has tried to go out of her way to combat the harm that she put out into the world, then I give her credit for that. But you left extremism, and now you're inadvertently pushing another version of extremism. It's not anti-gay extremism specifically, it's anti-trans extremism. Now, I haven't seen the interview, to be fair, so maybe she pushes back against J.K. Rowling, but the entire way that this is framed is concerning, right? Because the way that you're platforming her is you're giving her the chance to tell her side of the story while not giving trans people the chance to make the case as to why what she says is deeply, deeply troubling. So Megan is promoting this interview in her Twitter banner, and it's called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. And I get it. She wrote Harry Potter, so witch trials, I get the pun there. But to say that this is some sort of a witch hunt or the witch trials, as if she's the one who is being hated on, suggests that she's the victim and not the victimizer. And also, this is published on Barry Weiss's platform, who has also done turf apologia herself. Now, Megan was confronted by someone on Twitter about the title saying...
the story we've got about J.K. Rowling. So she had her past traumas and that. She got caught up in a bubble, said a few things that were not okay, pulled a Anita Sarkeesian and doubled down, and then got tangled up in the wrong crowd.
Given the title, it's pretty easy to see how, quote, unbiased it is. Not. But Megan pushed back, saying, the title is ambiguous. Toward the end of our conversations, I spent a long time talking with J.K. Rowling about discernment, about how a person can ever know if they're standing up for what's right or joining a moral panic. I think you'll be surprised by the thoughts she shares. So in other words, you're tacitly confirming that this is indeed a softball interview, and you're pushing one perspective. I mean, imagine asking David Duke, well, how do you know if you're morally in the right or you're just jumping on board with the moral panic when it comes to interracial marriage? I mean, do you understand why this is so frustrating? Because Megan Phelps Roper is somebody who pushed hatred, and she claims to have made amends, right? And she's left extremism, but here you are again, pushing more hate throughout the world after you claim to leave that. These things aren't morally gray areas, right? We can actually look at these situations very clear-eyed and determine that there's a group of people that wants to exist and another group of people that wants them to not exist. Morally, that's pretty clear to me. That is crystal clear, in fact. It's not a debate as to whether or not trans people exist or not. They exist. So the question that we all have as cis people is, are we going to respect their existence, or are we not going to do that and try to eliminate them from existence? J.K. Rowling has pushed the latter strategy, right? So to pretend as if this is even a debate inadvertently pushes this extremism that you claimed to move away from, Megan. Now, I'm not against you platforming J.K. Rowling. I mean, she has a bigger platform than any of us here. But to get her ear and not push her vehemently on these issues, to explain specifically how she's hateful, and merely just like pick her brain, that's propaganda. That is anti-trans turf propaganda. And apparently Megan hasn't learned her lesson. But either way, going back to J.K. Rowling, she is the individual who very clearly is the problem here, right? Pushing anti-trans bigotry, trying to change the minds of people, influence culture, to make it so that way trans people who are already marginalized, already victims, are less safe in this world. And that to me is disgusting, especially considering that she won't even take ownership of her hateful views. What a fucking coward.
Not surprised, a rich turf, always gonna be a rich turfy cunt. So yeah. Now, once again, will people finally stop denying she is a turf, she's a turf, she's a turf, she's a turf, except
Yeah, they'll
already.
keep denying because they're evil.
And they're stupid, too.
Yep. Alright, now it's time for Fox News wanting weed to stay illegal.
Well, before we get to that, like I said earlier, now you have a conflicted hatred view from your fans of Harry Potter because you had to open your big fat mouth. And if you stay quiet, no one would be hating you pretty much. Other than conservatives, because fuck Harry Potter in their eyes. So now, on to the next topic. Which is?
That would be the Fox wanting to keep weed illegal.
Fox? Being against freedom? I'm very surprised. Surprised Pikachu face. So let's see. Fox News begging for weed to stay legal.
All right, y'all. Here we are in the year of our Lord, 2023. And Fox News is continuing to do reefer madness level idiocy when it comes to marijuana. So I'm going to play this clip for you to have a panel discussion. Let's talk about the downsides of legalized weed. And we'll break it down as we go.
The downsides of legalizing weed.
With recreational marijuana now legal in 21 states, we're taking a closer look this week at the consequences. Advocates have long claimed that legalizing the drug would curb the black market. But recent evidence from New York, California, and other states finds the opposite is true, with legal weed markets across the country struggling to compete with their non-taxed illicit counterparts. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strom.
Let me pause it right up front here, because, excuse me, this is a Weasley argument. Weed is still illegal at a federal level. So it's still technically illegal in the United States of America. Yes, some states are experimenting and they've legalized it at the state level, but it's still illegal at a federal level. So yeah, since that's the case, of course you're still going to have a thriving black market. And yeah, of course you're always going to have, you know, the black market can undercut the price of the legal weed for a variety of reasons, the taxes, for example. But like, in the long run, if it was legalized, taxed, and regulated across the entire country, and, you know, you have a relatively competitive price for it, yeah, the black market is going to take a huge hit. Because they used to have literally 100% of the weed market in the U.S., and then if weed was legal, tax, and regulated all around the U.S., I mean, we're talking about a drop to what? 20% of the market? They take a gigantic hit. Because people would rather, you know, go into a store that has, like, elevator music playing and nice LED lights and somebody nice behind the cash register than meet behind a dumpster at the Jack in the Box. You know, because when you deal in the black market, things get sketchy. They get sketchy. So it's just a Weasley point. He doesn't even acknowledge that technically weed is still not legal at the federal level. Anyway.
And Jason Riley. So, Jason, you wrote this week about the marijuana market in New York, which you said is heading toward farce. What's going on?
Well, the problem in New York is that while they've made selling weed legal, they've been very slow to give people permits to set up shop. So,
okay, then be quicker with the permits. Problem solved.
people are setting up shops without permits.
And also in my state, stop making it take so long for weed to be legalized. Like we legalized it back in November, but it's actually not going to be actually legal until like the first day of June and July, like 6 months from now. The election has been almost a year later. Like, why so long? Just do it now.
They decided they're
ridiculous.
going to and
okay, so give the people who set up shops without permits the permits and don't raid them. Problem solved. Like every single thing they bring up in here is like such tedious garbage. You know, like they're simple solutions, but the whole point of this, I should be clear, the whole point of this segment is not to actually like nuance troll. The whole point of this segment is to be like, oh, maybe it was a mistake to legalize weed in some states. Maybe it's actually really bad.
And that's why I think you have an element of farce there. Out in California, the situation is a little different, but because of the taxes and regulations put on selling legal marijuana in California, it's much more expensive than it is in the black market. So people are still going to the black market in order to buy it because it's cheaper. So it's just some of the unintended consequences that have been put in place.
Do you hear a black market for alcohol?
In New York, they're reserving.
Oh wait, no, I
No,
don't.
really, no.
Because it's legal everywhere.
Prohibition.
These permits. I mean, they're basically asking people who are they're convicted of something to then be the legal dispensers of marijuana.
So I totally get the logic of why they would do that. You know, it's like, here's the argument. The drug war disproportionately cracked down on communities of color and black people, and, you know, it would be messed up to legalize it and then give all the permits to, like, upper-class white businessmen. Because you had people who were in the drug trade, and they were arrested and locked up for it. That was unfair to them. So basically, a way to sort of, like, a little hat tip to say, hey, my bad, man, we shouldn't have locked you up to begin with, is like, you guys can get a certain percentage of the permits. I actually totally understand that idea in theory, and I agree with it. I guess the issue that they're running into is, turns out the people who would do, you know, black market drug dealing are not exactly the same kind of people who are going to fill out all the government paperwork and go through the proper procedure to get the forms you need and the permits you need in the first place. Which is like, okay, I mean, I'd be open to the idea of reforming that part of the law, right? Or at least expediting the process to get permits to people who are upfront and want it right now. But don't act like you don't get where that idea came from, right? Like, everybody understands that's a reasonable attempt to try to sort of pay back for the injustice that was the drug war disproportionately cracking down on communities of color. I mean, if somebody was locked up because they were a drug dealer, I don't even think that should be a crime. So, of course, not only should they be let out, there should be some sort of compensation. This is their version of, like, how society's going to compensate you. You can get a crack at a permit and be one of the first in line.
Yes, that's exactly what's going on. One of the reasons the supporters wanted to pass this law was to address racial disparities in the criminal justice system. But what we've learned from states that have had pot legal for more than a decade, states like Colorado and Washington State, is that those racial disparities have not gone away. In some places, they've actually increased. And so, again, that is another unintended consequence of supposedly well-meaning legislation.
Because weed's been legal. I have my broad GIF face right now.
Answers here is to try to get an exemption under federal law to be able to form a compact with other states that have legal marijuana so that they can export some of their marijuana to these other states so that the pricing will be, the supply-demand mix will be better in California. It's really weird, particularly because under federal law, the Controlled Substances Act, marijuana is still illegal. It's a Schedule I drug.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Simple as that.
Let's think about this in another context. Let's imagine that Texas wanted to make a compact to export firearms to other states in contravention of various federal laws and rules. I mean, this is essentially what they're doing, but it's because of the major
Except
problem
guns bad, weed's not bad. That's the difference.
Many of the states, as their voters passed these referendum to make pot legal, local or the states also decided that they were going to minimize any kind of charges against people who are caught engaging in illegal marijuana behavior. And so if you are one of those black market people, that's what's behind this huge spiral, is not only can you sell it for more money, but you've been given a green light by your local government that if you do get caught, nothing's really going to happen to you much. And
yeah, but like, so the answer is legalize, tax, and regulate for the entire country and free all the nonviolent drug offenders. There's none at the federal level anymore, although 4,000 people got their records wiped clean because of what Biden did. But yeah, like at the state level, they should free them too. So all these discrepancies in the law are a real problem, but their way to tackle it is in the opposite direction. They're like, yeah, just go back to like the drug war. Why would we do that when one of the architects of the drug war, who worked in the Nixon administration, admitted the real purpose of it? It's his words, not mine. He said, look, who were our enemies politically in the Nixon White House? Our enemies were hippie white people and minorities, black people. And so we found a way to criminalize their lifestyle. They were never going to vote for us, so we basically retaliated. That's what they said. You can go find the quote. You know, Nixon administration official admits what the drug war was actually about. It was all over the place. The story came out, it was years ago now, but that's the whole purpose. It wasn't actually like, we are going to protect the American people and the children from harmful substances. Are you kidding me? Alcohol is gigantic in this country. There are a lot of problems associated with it, but I don't want to ban it. You want to know why? Because at the end of the day, they're missing all of it. All their arguments are missing the point, right? Doesn't matter. You can nitpick in this area. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, freedom is what people believe in on this front. Freedom.
But conservatives don't like freedom.
As long as you're not hurting
Of
anybody
course
else.
not, because they love locking people up
Then yeah, like some people should get help. They should go to rehab. There should be health
and
professionals.
killing them if
No
they're
doubt about it.
minorities.
But for your average adult, they should be able to do whatever they want without input from these weird nerds. Like nobody cares what your opinion is. Nobody cares about you nitpicking. Oh, what about this problem and that problem? No. Bottom line is legalize, tax, and regulate. Make sure this stuff is safe, this stuff is reasonably priced, and then sort of let the chips fall where they may. And there's no doubt that you will. The black market will take a huge hit in that scenario, no matter how much they try to gaslight you and act like that wouldn't happen.
That's also inspiring this, and some more dangerous things out in California. You are now having reports of drug cartels getting involved in this, and it sort of shows what happens when government doesn't have a real plan, a plausible plan for regulation, and isn't willing to punish those that are lawbreakers under that plan.
Again, the problem, if legal California marijuana businesses are getting in bed with cartels, what's the core of that problem? The core of that problem is the federal government hasn't legalized marijuana yet, so you can't have some legal growing operation that they can do business with. It's easier for them to go to the people who've been in business for a long time, who maybe have more product and know what they're doing more, etc. So it's
just like with alcohol during Prohibition.
Exactly. 2023, for the love of God. Have you seen the polls on this issue?
Yep.
The polls on this issue are colossally high now, over 60%. I think some are up to 70% of legalized weed. You lost. You lost on the issue. Move on to your next culture war, ooga booga, be afraid garbage.
Or better yet, how about don't do culture war crap at all? How about that one?
That's all they've got, though. That's the thing. So of course they'll never
Democratic majority leader in the Senate
go away with the culture war
Do you think that's
stuff.
the answer? No, that is not the answer. That is far from the answer, Paul. What a catastrophe it would be for the federal government to legalize marijuana. I mean, let's understand.
No, that would be very base.
Why the heck is all of this going on? It can't be real. It's because states like California and New York need the money. They think they're going to get tax revenue. That's why they've been legalizing casinos. That's why they legalize sports betting. They think they're going to get tax revenue from legalizing vice. But put this in the context. Marijuana is a drug. You inhale it, you chew it. It alters the chemistry in your brain. There is a lot of reason to believe that the marijuana being made today is much more powerful than that was being used at Woodstock back in the 1960s. And we just had the government.
My mom would beg to differ on that one, but okay.
Among teenagers and thoughts of suicide are going up.
Yes, because kids and teens are using weed. Even though all states have it legalized, you have to be 21 to get it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch this experiment take place in the states. But
No, we've got more problems. We've got our problems actually vaping, not marijuana, because we're still doing a big chunk of the culture war, so of the drug war. So
it's not legal. You can have a law where adults can use it, but kids can't use it, and that's what it is and what it should be at the federal level. Of course, we do the same thing with alcohol. But teenagers bad, drug bad, mess with your brain chemistry.
Drug bad, okay.
Sometimes people take a downer because they want to relax more. Sometimes people take an upper because they want to be more awake and more focused. Sometimes people take a hallucinogenic because they want to party with Scooby-Doo in their boxers as they eat cookie dough ice cream. Yeah, it's a hashtag freedom. It's amazing.
Freedom. If you want to do drugs, go ahead. But if you want to be clean like me, go right ahead too.
Which they mean, hey, let the capitalists do whatever they want and treat their workers like property. That's what they mean. That's the type of freedom they believe in. Freedom for the capitalists to control their workers. That's the kind of economic freedom they believe in. When it comes to social
issues,
there is authoritarianism in favor of big government as humanly possible. They want the government to arrest you for smoking weed, arrest you for selling weed, arrest you for being involved with any drug whatsoever, except whiskey, because that dude probably likes a glass of whiskey every night. So that's cool, because that's mine.
Because cultural values say alcohol is okay, but weed isn't.
Jesus Christ! Just
exactly.
Be honest up front instead of trying to nitpick and find the holes in the argument and the holes in the.
Just
come out and say,
conservatives like to nitpick everything. Remember, because they're crude.
At least then it'd be all out there in the
controlling.
But you can't do that because your true feelings are so beyond mockable. So you come up with these pathetic rationalizations to justify your position. Well, it ain't working. It's nowhere near working. And by the way, when you live in a country which is such a late-stage capitalist hellscape, and you have people suffering on a daily basis, over 70% of people living paycheck to paycheck, unions are at a historic low, even though we've seen some good, movement recently in the right direction with some places unionizing, Starbucks, Amazon, etc. But, people are struggling. You have tens of millions of people who are uninsured or underinsured when it comes to their health care. You have the top 1% effectively stole $50 trillion from the bottom 90% since the 1970s. You have all these problems. The very least that the elites can do is to say,
and since America's founding, they've stolen $1 quadrillion.
Back from you. So gross. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all.
What do you guys say about conservatives having a meltdown over weed legalization again?
A meltdown about something. This is nothing new.
Yep. And once weed legalize everywhere, they'll find another excuse to cry about. That's what you conservatives always do. Cry about everything. Shut up and embrace freedom. Unless you're un-American.
Exactly.
Oof. I wouldn't be surprised, because you guys, a lot of you aren't. I mean, are anti-American. Yeah. Like Hinkle Boy.
Yes, like Jenkins Dinkle.
Alright, so that is all the topics. It was nice to finally watch some videos again. And see you all guys next time for episode 71.
See you then.